Alright guys, back on this 450 Foreman. Got the crank in there, still got the oil screen in the bottom. We're going to put the transmission in it now. I've got my transmission all together here in a box. It's about the easiest way to do it. If you can keep everything together, keep your gears together, because these things fall apart and they get a little hairy on how you put this all back together if your gears fall off your shaft. So what you want to do is grab this bunch of gears here on this, I guess it's a shorter shaft than the other one, and this bunch of gears here, and you're going to end up meshing these things up and sticking them in at about the same time. Both of them have washers, so this set of gears here have a washer on the end. The big set of gears here have washers on both ends, so just hold on to those because you don't want the washers to fall out. The way the gears mesh up is about like this here, and for some reason I'm thinking that I'm going to have to put this output shaft in there first. Let's go ahead and stick it in. It slides in this bearing here, so slide it in. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it all the way in there because of my engine stand's going to hit, but that's good. That's close enough there. Alright, and then these two, this big set of gears goes in this bearing, this smaller set goes in this top bearing. So just slide those in all at one time. Alright, so there you go. They slide right in there. Pretty much bottom out. Your output shaft gear here is hitting my engine stand. It should also mesh up just like that. These things won't really shift through the gears because they're not actually in neutral until you put the shift forks in. Alright, so the next thing we're going to slide in is going to be this reverse gear here. It has a washer on this side with a little pin and a washer on this front side too. The pin for this thing lines up in that little crack right there. So just stick that gear back on there. Got to kind of slide out on this on that big gear there to get the shaft to slide in. Once your shaft slides in there, it should go in pretty easy, just like that. So the way this sits is you got a washer here, no washer on this shaft. Alright, next thing we need to put in will be our shift forks. I've got them all together here. Just looking at the shift forks, all the Hondas are pretty much the same. This one's got a FR for front, C for center, and RR for rear. So you just have to install them with those letters facing the front of the engine here. And it works best if you tilt this thing back, because these will fall off the gears if you don't have a little bit of tilt to it. So slide that. The rear one goes in there on this shaft. The center one, and the way you can kind of halfway line these things up, so they've got these pins on them and they have to line up on the shift drum. So your pins, just the way these pins are facing, both of these forks are going to go on this set of gears here, the big set, or the gears that had the most gears on them. So just stick them in there. I don't know if I'm just lucky or that's just how it winds up, but I usually can get these things in there lined up pretty well without really fighting with them much. So there you go, got all that lined up. That rear one fell back out, but I'm gonna stick this shift drum in there just to keep everything together. Got a little bit of dirt on it. Well, let me grab some brake cleaner, shoot this thing off real quick. Alright, got it cleaned up a little bit there with some brake cleaner. And slide this in. Like I said, that rear, I haven't got the shaft in for the shift forks yet. That'll be the last thing we stick in. And the way this thing goes in is the end with the little slot in it goes in first. It goes against the back of the engine. So what I like to do is just hold up on your shift forks, all three of them, feed the shift drum in there, and then worry about getting the shift forks in the actual slots. And once that's done, normally what you have to do is get these shift forks picked up about halfway into their movement and line them up in a slot like that right there. Middle one fell back out just like that, and then take your shaft and wiggle it down in there, wiggle the shift forks around to get everything lined up. That rear one just is not wanting to stay in there. It fell out again. Stick it back up in there. Right there. And get it in my slot. Wiggle this thing around. A lot of times with that shift shaft, you have to tap it in with a hammer. You don't have to hit it hard, but just to get everything lined up. And then it goes in and actually hits the back case. And you continue tapping until it bottoms out. Right there. There you go. And now it's, I don't know what gear it's in, because it's probably halfway between gears. So, but that's what you want to do. Everything's in there, and there's nothing left in our transmission box here. So that's how you put the transmission in this thing. Next thing I'm going to do is run around here with a little bit of brake cleaner and clean up this mating surface. Probably going to put a little light layer of RTV around it, stick us a new gasket on there, and put the case back on, the front case back on. So I'll make sure everything's cleaned up. I'll cut the camera back on in just a sec. Alright guys, I got a light layer of RTV put around this thing. There are two dowel pins you want to make sure you have in. One's here by the, this would be the right side motor mount as it sits in the bike, and then one up here above the reverse gear. And then just put your gasket back on here. You really don't have to put RTV on here with the gasket. I just like to do it, and kind of helps to seal everything up. A lot of these bikes I work on get run through the water from time to time, so I like to have them as watertight as I can make them. Alright, so I've got the other side. I did put a light coat of RTV on it as well. And really the only thing on here, want to make sure you got your oil screen in there, which I did, and washer here, and that's pretty much it. So I'm going to slide this cover back over. One thing you want to do with it is hold this tensioner arm up to keep it from getting caught on your crankshaft as you're sliding everything back in here together. And get your output shaft lined up, your shaft here going to your clutch lined up, and just wiggle this thing back on here. Tilts it up just a little bit. Kind of work it down on there. There's a lot of stuff that has to line up on here, so you kind of have to just work it on as you go down with it. Not applying a whole lot of pressure here, just enough to get everything slid in. The this little arm here, I think it's going to be in the way because my shift drum is going to hit it, and I done got it past it, so I'm going to have to loosen that up, but it's alright right now. So now we're closed up pretty good on our gap, so I'm going to go ahead and stick some bolts in this thing. Bunch of bolts go around. Well, actually not many on this side. There's only 3 on the front side. Most of your bolts go on the back side of this thing. So I've got those in my cardboard here. Front cover. They're different sizes, and that's where putting everything in a piece of cardboard really helps out. So got one in here, one in here, and then one over here on this side. Just kind of snug those up a little bit with my impact. Like I'd said before, there's a lot of other bolts that have to be tightened up from the other side. So I'll get all all those installed and tightened up before I come back and torque down those last 3 bolts. So let me get all these installed and torque these things to about 10 Newton meters, about 9 foot-pounds or something like that. And then I will cut the camera back on our next step. Alright guys, back on the 450 again. I'm going to start putting everything back together on this back side here. I did have to find a, well, I found one, the keyway Woodruff key here for the crankshaft. Since this is a new crank, it doesn't come with one. So I beat the one out of the old one and it went flying across the shop, so I had to find one out of an old crank I had. But anyway, make sure you put that keyway back in there. Next thing we're going to do is start putting the flywheel back on. It has this big washer that goes behind the flywheel. Don't forget that or it won't sit in there quite right. Then the gears for the starter, pretty sure you got to put these on first. I think I put the flywheel on before and then figured out that this won't go on there if you don't put it on before the flywheel. It goes in this hole up here at the top right, and then you can slide your flywheel over. Your flywheel, mine just picked up all kind of stuff off the cart here. The flywheel needs this bearing here. It slides over that. And then just line your keyway up on your flywheel with your Woodruff key that's in here and slide everything on there like that. There you go, it kind of slides down on. Other thing I like to do is go ahead and take your crankshaft bolt and run that thing down on there with your impact. This is what goes inside the flywheel. Run this back down in there, line your notch up in there, because what'll happen if you don't get this crank pressed on there or this flywheel pressed on there pretty good right now, that it will, when you go to set that stator on there with the way it's magnetized, it will suck the flywheel off, and then sometimes you might not be able to get it lined back up with your Woodruff key. So go ahead and tighten that thing down, and it'll save you the headache later. Let me hit that with the impact, and I'll cut the camera back on. Alright guys, next thing we need to stick in is the reverse safety arm here. When I pulled this thing apart, I stuck a zip tie on there to hold that washer. There's a washer that needs to go on the outside here. And these things can be a little bit of a pain to get in there, but make sure your spring hooks in that little notch there on the arm. I usually kind of wedge it up in there a little sideways. It works pretty good if you get a pair of needle nose pliers to hold on to the arm. What you have to do is kind of push down on the arm so that it doesn't catch in the end of the shift drum, all while pushing in on the arm so that it goes into your hole that it's got to line up with on your crankcase. That's how you do it there. This thing's got a little bit of crud on it. Clean that off, stick your washer on. Alright, next thing to go on is your shift shaft. This is a electric shift model, so it's got a long shift shaft on it. The shift shaft does have a little snap ring and a O-ring there. Make sure you keep that O-ring on it. It slides through to the front. And also, I line this thing up. You want to make sure you get it into neutral so that your shift sensor will hook in right. And I think I did this earlier, but when you don't have any of the shifting stuff in the front, there's nothing to tell whether this shift shaft or the shift drum is in neutral or not. So I usually rotate it around. It'll stop naturally in both directions, so it makes it easier with that reverse arm in there, because the reverse arm stops it. You're wanting to get it into neutral, and if it stops at the reverse arm and you pry down on that reverse arm and it rotates one more time, then that's in reverse. So then you know if you go back to that reverse arm pops out right there, then that's neutral. And you can also look here, there's the slot in that shift shaft lines up with this little hole here. Well, actually, if you rotate it all around, this slot will line up too, but this is a way that just a sure way to know that it's in neutral. So make sure you get that lined up, because you can tear your sensor up if you beat that back cover on with that not lined up. Alright, so let me get the gasket for this thing and get the cover. I think it's already cleaned up, so put just a little dab of RTV around this thing, and then we'll stick it back together. I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, got the light coat RTV all the way around this and stuck the new gasket on. 2 dowel pins here and here. Make sure they're in there. They'll help hold the gasket up. Then we're going to need to slide this back cover on. Got it cleaned up along with a light coat RTV on it too. Biggest thing here is to make sure that your shifter, this arm right here, lines up into this shaft here. I can't really remember which way it goes. Let me see. Looks like it's going to have to be in this direction here, kind of at the 9 o'clock position, 10 o'clock position. So slide this thing over, and that's the only thing you really got to watch, is to make sure that your little tab off of your shift shaft lines up on your shifter. Yes, you got to make sure your gasket's good on your seal's good on your reverse shaft as well as your output shaft. Both of those look good. You can actually look through the dipstick hole and see if you're lining up with your shift shaft and all that. Alright, it's all the way down there. See if I can shine the flashlight in there and you can see it. If you look right through your hole there, and move that shifter, see it's lined up right in there perfect. So that's the biggest thing about getting everything lined up back here. Alright, so now let me stick the bolts in this thing. 10mm headed bolts all the way around here. Stick them in, hit them with a torque wrench, and then I'll cut the camera back on right before we put the stator on. Alright guys, I got all the bolts tightened down, torqued them down to that 10 Newton meters like always. And next thing we need to do is put these gears on. You got a gear that goes over this shaft that sticks out here and a washer on it. And then there's another gear that meshes up with the starter, and it's got a shaft on it. It goes in this direction here. Right there. I know that wobbles around, but when you put the cover on there, it holds everything together. I also went ahead and stuck the gasket, or well, I guess you call this seal on here, this rubber seal that seals off the stator. So I am gonna put a little bit of easy tiger. I am going to put a little bit of RTV on these 2 locations here where the wires come out, because if it leaks anywhere, that's where it's going to leak. And also the final thing you want to do, as we spoke about earlier, was the shift shaft. Make sure that this arm right here is in the right location. And what you want to do is the end mark. If you can look at that little sensor there, there's a little notch cut out of it here, and the end is just above it. Well, kind of looks like a Z in this direction, but that's the neutral mark. What you want to do is this arm here, you need to adjust it to where the long side of it. See, this side's a little longer than this side. The long side is pointing to that end, and that's showing the bike that it's in neutral. So that if you line that up and have already lined your shift drum up down there in neutral, it should go together right. So let me get this thing cleaned up. I'm gonna put a little bit of RTV on those 2 locations where the wires come out, and then we'll snap it together here in a second. Alright guys, got a little bit of RTV in those 2 locations where the wires come out, and we're gonna snap this thing on here. Need to hold on to this thing pretty good, because like I said before, it's magnetized and it will try to snatch out of your hand. And the last thing you want to do is to slam it down on that switch, on that gear selector switch. It would have made this a little bit easier if I'd have took that boot off, but I didn't. So get it twisted on there kind of straight. Something's hitting over here. Well, I think the problem I've got here is because somehow I've got 2 dowel pins in there. So that goes to tell me that one of those dowels goes somewhere else. So it will never go together with an extra dowel pin. So undoubtedly it fell out on the cart when I took this thing apart, and that's just the spot I thought it went, but obviously it didn't. So then just ease this thing down. As you can tell, it actually is almost all the way seated down in there, so that means that our shift sensor did line up, because it won't go that far if it does hit. It's hung on this top dowel pin here, so I am going to tap it down on there. I wouldn't force this thing down on here, because that is how you bust that sensor open. And it is somewhat repairable if you do happen to mess that sensor up or get that thing off. But the worst part about it is that it won't show it's in neutral. A lot of times it won't show it's in neutral, or it may not be in neutral and will show it's in there, but the thing won't crank if you can't get it in neutral. So let me stick the bolts in here, but I believe we're good on our shift sensor. Stick the bolts in here. Also stick that 17mm with the pull start thing back on it in there. I'm going to tighten that up. Also going to put this sensor here. I believe that's a speed sensor. Goes back in that hole right here. I'm going to stick that back in there. It's got this little spacer that goes on it, and make sure the O-rings are on there. So I'll tighten that up as well. So let me get all that tightened up, cut the camera back on the next step. Alright guys, got it flipped around to the front side now. We're going to start out by putting the cam in this thing. I did get a new cam chain. KMC. It's not a OEM one, but it's just as good. Their OEM ones get a little overpriced for some reason or another. So we're going to get this thing timed up. Got the cam here. I didn't remove the cam sprocket on this. You don't have to in this case. Feed this cam chain over it, and make sure you got it to your T-mark. I showed that earlier through your hole there. Line that T-mark up with the center of that hole, and see if I can make sure that's just right before I stick the cam in there. And it's pretty dang close. So now all you got to do is feed your cam in the hole and put your chain over the gear on the crankshaft. Just keep feeding it in slow. There it is. Alright, kind of get it. I'd like to try to get it close. What you're trying to line up here is you've got a dimple right here on the gear, and then there's another dimple at the top, and you're trying to line it up with that notch that you can kind of barely see there cast into the case, and that's how you get everything timed up. So spinning it around, it looks like it's real close. Check my I don't know, might be one tooth off. Let me go one more tooth over, see where that puts us. That's pretty dang close there. So at this point you can kind of wiggle your cam in there. There's a bearing on the back side that the cam has to line up with. Sometimes you have to kind of tap it in to get it to line up just right, but there it is. Alright, and then you can see there that the dimple here, that little dimple there, and that cast piece in the block are all lined up. So that should be timed up at top dead center. So now you just stick your retainer bolt in there and tighten that thing down. I think it's about 25 Newton meters is what that calls for. So slide it back behind the cam, tighten it down, and you got it timed up. So let me grab the tensioner. That'll be the next thing we stick in, and we'll put that in there. So cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, next thing we're going to do is stick this tensioner in here. The way this thing works, it's got a big Phillips head screw on it. Back that thing out, and then that'll open your tensioner up. This is a spring-loaded tensioner. If you stick, they make a tool kind of like this. This is just out of a piece of aluminum because I could cut it easy. And you could use a screwdriver. Sometimes these lock down with a screwdriver, sometimes they don't. But if you take and back this thing down with a screwdriver or with this little tool I made, and there's actually little notches in here that you can lock the tool in there, so it depress the tensioner and keep it like that until you get it bolted up. You don't really want to bolt this thing up with it extended out because it'll stretch the chain out and cause a big mess. So you don't want to do that, but just leave it depressed like this. I didn't change the gasket on it, but I'm just going to put some RTV. There's actually nothing wrong with the gasket. Put a little RTV to seal it off. Slide it down in here and put the two 10mm bolts in it. Then your tensioner is pretty well done. I don't know where my socket went to, but we'll run with this one. Run it down on there, then pull your little key out, and it'll let the tensioner extend out right there. Put tension back on your chain. You should be good to go. Put your Phillips head screw back in there, and you're done with the cam chain. Next thing we're going to do is put the oil pump back in, and there's a guide that goes in here too. So let me stick those two in, and well, let me grab them and I'll cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, now we're going to be working on this oil pump. I did buy the inner and outer gear to go in here so we can rebuild this. Usually whenever I rebuild an engine on one, I at least want the oil pressure to be good when you get it back going, because that might not be the reason it failed, but it's not going to be the reason why it fails when I put it back together. So what I'm going to do is take this pump apart. It had that Phillips head screw on the back. It was pretty tight, so I had to use the impact to get it off. Then there's a little snap ring right here on this shaft. You have to pull it off too. I've got some snap ring pliers here, but they're going in the wrong direction, so I'm going to have to see if I can make them work. Just because I'm too lazy to switch them around. And it won't work. So let me cut the camera back off. I got to switch these things around and get this thing apart. Alright, back at it now. Just snap that thing right off of there. Hang on to it because it's easy to lose. There's also a washer in here that you have to pull off. You can just push the shaft through, grab your washer, lay it down, flip it over, and that exposes your shaft here and your two gears. See if I can get them to come out. There's one of them. There's the other. So they fall out. Let me clean these up, and I'll open up these two bags with this new stuff in it and put it back together. I might just do it while you wait if y'all can be patient. Alright, so there you go. That's clean. Let me get these gears out. Somebody's pulling up out there, so we won't have to postpone this video for a minute. Alright, cut the camera back on in a sec. Alright guys, I got this oil pump cleaned out. These are my new gears here. Just slide them in here like that. Go ahead and stick this shaft through. The part with the machined out little square in it there, it goes on the back side of your oil pump. Just feed it through there like that, and then you just need to put your washer back on this end and drop the washer just like that. Then you just hope you're gonna find it. The washer actually has a flat spot on it, so you have to make sure that flat spot lines up with the spot on the shaft. And I can't pick the washer up. Alright, I got it now. So, like I said, a flat spot on the washer there needs to line up with the flat spot on the shaft. And then put your snap ring back over it. And while I'm doing all this, I've let the gear fall out the back. So next thing you need to do is just put your back plate back on. Spin it around right there, and your Phillips head screw back in it, and then you're ready to bolt it back on the motor. Let me get all this stuff tightened up, and I'll cut the camera back on right before I bolt it up. Alright, got all this back together finally. The only thing you got to do here is just make sure the shaft here lines up at the end of that shaft in there, and I believe it goes something sort of along these lines. Kind of wiggle it around to get it to line up. There you go, like that, and then goes in like that. The other thing you got to do is put this cam chain guide in there. Cam chain guide here, it actually needs to go in first because that little tab right there kind of locks it in. Slide it over that arm, spin it around like that, just like that. And this oil pump also has a dowel here and an O-ring. You need to make sure you put those in as well. Go in right there. 3 bolts to hold them in, and that'll be done. So let me stick those in, and I'll cut the camera back on. We'll get ready to do the clutches. Alright guys, got the oil pump on there, ready to go now. Now we're going to start putting some of this stuff back together on this shifter over here. The shift drum. I got a whole bag of parts here. Hopefully I can find everything I need pretty quick. Like, first thing we need to stick on is this star looking piece. The easiest way to do this is pry down on this arm here with the screwdriver. Stick your star piece in there, and there's actually a pin that's supposed to go in there to line it up, and I don't know where it is right now. Hopefully it's in this bag somewhere. But hang on, let me cut the camera back on a sec and I'll find that pin and we will proceed. Alright guys, I found a little pin. It goes through this hole here, the only open hole in the star piece there. And that, another way to show that this thing's in neutral is that pin lines up with this little arrow that's cast into the case. Alright, next thing we need to stick on is a washer. There's 2 washers here that were left on my parts list, and got 2 different size holes. The bigger hole goes in there first. We'll stick this other one on a little bit later. Next thing you need to put on is this little, looks like a golf divot tool. Slides in there like that. And then this washer here, still with a hole that's going to line up with your notch. Stick that in there like that, and then this 10mm bolt. Make sure this bolt here that you put some Loctite on it, preferably some red stuff. I've had these things get loose before and make it do all sorts of crazy stuff, different crazy shifting and all kind of stuff. So make sure you put some Loctite on that thing because you don't want it to back out. And it calls to be tightened down a little bit more than most of the other ones. It calls for a 16 Newton-meter torque, which is a little more than they normally have. So let me see if I can crank this torque wrench down to that and get it to tighten it up. Alright, that's a 10mm headed bolt too. So slide this off of here, put it on here like this. I'll be close. There we go. That's tight. Shouldn't come back off. Alright, next thing we need to slide on is this. Well, we actually got 2 parts here. This part here with the spring on it. It slides over this shaft like that, and then the spring part goes over this little pin down here and lines up in the top here too. Do another pin. One thing you want to make sure, the back side of this thing has a little weld on it. You want to make sure that it sits down in there far enough that it goes between this little fork tool. Let's see where the flashlight is. See if I can see that in here. Yeah, so what we got here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this or not. There's a little flange on the back of this this part here, the flange has to go between the fork of this, the little part that looks like a divot tool. If you don't have it in there, it won't seat in there far enough, and the front cover won't go on. So let me see if I can get this thing twisted back in here a little bit. Slid back, there it goes, just like that. It slides in about another, I don't know, 1/16 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch, and you need to make sure you get it in that far at least, because it won't bolt up like it's supposed to. All right, as you can see, we're pretty close on everything. There's practically touching together, and that's the way you want to have it when you get it all together. All right, next thing to go in will be this tool, this piece here, and it actually has to line up with some splines on the shift shaft. So spin this thing around a little bit until you line up your splines, and then it also slides into where this pin is between the spring here. See what other arms and stuff we got in here. Everything else is going to go on after the clutch. So that's done. Now we can stick the crankshaft gear in there. This gear here, along with the washer. Don't forget your washer. It slides over like that. Then your crankshaft gear goes on like that. And your clutch, change clutch, will go on next. That's this one here. Make sure you have this bushing in the back side of it. Slide this thing on here like this. Got some little teeth in there that's got to line up, and then line up on your gear, and that's in there good. I'm not real sure where the nut is for that thing. I don't see it right off. We'll have to find it. So anyway, find that nut. And then the next one will go on and be your centrifugal clutch. This centrifugal clutch here is worn out pretty bad. You can see the pieces missing on the clutch shoes. So I went ahead and bought another clutch just to replace it, because this guy's got some big tires and stuff on here, so it's probably going to get some abuse. So there's your new clutch, and it just slides in just like this. Kind of rotate it around. One-way bearing's still good on it. You can tell by it'll only move in one direction. And then this just slides down over top of that crankcase gear, and then you have a nut and a washer to go on it, like that and like this. Tighten both of them things up. The torque spec on that is 118 foot-pounds. I normally just hit them pretty good with the impact, and it's got holes in it to stake it. I staked both of them in there good. Never had a problem with one coming off. So that's pretty much it done on the front end, aside from a couple bearings and stuff to go in here. So let me go find the nut for this, and I will get all this tightened up and cut the camera back on right before I put these last arms and stuff together. Alright guys, got both of these tightened up tight. Staked both of them in there, just not hit a notch in them with the punch. Next thing to go in is this little holder with the bearing on it. Goes inside your change clutch here. Just slides right in there like that. And then this arm here goes also on your shift shaft. It also has to line up with a spline part of it. Goes in that direction there. And zoom in on it a little bit there so you can see what's going on. And then this piece goes on like this. That bearing is not pressed in, not knocked in there all the way. Let me hit it with the hammer real quick. There you go. And this little forked piece on this should line up about or close to the center there. And then the last piece to go on there will be, or well, I'm sorry, we got one more. This washer here goes on the outside, and then the triangle shaped piece with the balls on it here, it goes in with the spring going toward the inside of the engine, and that should be everything right there. So next thing we need to do is clean up this mating surface and clean up the inside of that front cover and stick the front cover on it. So let me get the front cover cleaned up good, and we will cut the camera back on in a second. Alright guys, I got the gasket little RTV stuck on it. This thing does have dowels that goes in here and here. They actually aren't in the case. I left them in the cover here to help line the gasket up. So all you got to do now is just slide this thing over your shift shaft there. Like I said before, this is a electric shift bike, so on a foot shift bike your shaft doesn't stick out the front like this. So slide that on. One other thing I want to make sure is your O-ring is still in there at your oil pump, as well as your triangle shaped piece there is still on there for your clutch. And then that's pretty much all the checks you need to do. Slide this thing over. Let's see if I can get a rubber hammer here, maybe tap it on a little bit. It's got to line the bearing up with the end of the crankshaft. You can feel it kind of catching right there. So that's going on there like that. And that's it. Front cover's on. So now just stick all those bolts in there. So, right good many of them. They're on the cardboard. All these are here about to fall out. So we got to stick all those bolts in there. And might go ahead and stick the starter in too. Maybe we'll cut the camera back on in a second and do the starter, because we hadn't got those bolts in there. Let me get all these bolts in, cut the camera back on in a second. Alright guys, while I got this thing tore down here, I may as well go put the electric shift stuff back on. It's a little bit easier to do sitting here on the bench than it is after you put it back on the bike. So what we got to do first is put the gears in there. And hopefully I can remember how these things go in. It may be a little bit of trial and error here. So I believe that one goes in there. That's the big gear. Goes in this on this shaft. The other funny looking gear here has a little notch in the back side of it, and it lines up with a spline piece that's on that shift shaft there. Pretty much just center the thing up on there, and then this little gear goes in the bottom just like that. And all there is left to do is bolt the actual motor back on, and it goes on like this. It does have an O-ring seal in there, so make sure you that's still in there, because you don't want to leave the O-ring out. And I'm not real sure if I'm going to be able to. This, for some reason, this has a 8mm headed bolt down here at the bottom by the shift motor. The other ones are the 10s. I'm not real sure if I'm going to be able to put this on with the angle. I believe it'll go on there. I think I can still push that angle sensor plug on with that guard on there. It's very difficult to get off with the guard still on there, but I think it'll be easier to put back on. So snug this thing up, and that's how you put the electric shift stuff back together on here. I got to grab me an 8mm socket, because I don't have one right here, to tighten up that last remaining bolt, and that'll be it. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to stick a new oil filter on there, and then we'll jump to the top end. Alright guys, now we got to stick the starter on this thing. Just stick it through the shaft here, or through the hole here. Make sure your O-ring's on there. And it'll slide it forward. And then put your 2 10mm bolts in it. I did put the oil filter in there. And I need to put these motor mounts in, so just knock them in. Alright guys, now we're ready to start putting this cylinder back together here. First thing we need to stick in there is going to be the piston. I've got the mating surface cleaned up pretty well here. It does have the 2 dowels still in there from where we took it apart. I ended up buying one of these Niche Industries piston cylinder kits for this thing. This bike had a piston, or had a cylinder in it that was bored out to the max, and it was smoking, and like I said, had some play in the crank and all that. So ended up having to replace the whole cylinder. And these, I've never used one of this brand, but I've used some of these aftermarket ones in the past, and have actually had pretty good luck with them. They just use a cast aluminum piston, which is pretty much the same thing that Honda uses. Then the biggest thing is the cylinder. You can get these kits pretty inexpensive, but if you had to go buy a cylinder from Honda, they're very expensive, especially on some of these older bikes like this 450. So this is a lot more cost-effective option. The first thing you got to do with it, I just pull this piston out of the box, and I have to put the snap ring in the end of it, the wrist pin ring. It can be just a little bit tricky from time to time. Take a screwdriver and kind of halfway get it started in the groove that you're shooting for, and press this thing in there. And I think I done got my finger stuck in the piston. So press this thing in there until you get it in all the way. I'm starting out with this one kind of with the gap in it at the top, and I think I'll be able to work it around with this screwdriver. Just want to keep your finger on these snap rings the whole time, because they will fly off and shoot over into the neighbor's yard. Shoot, I'm gonna have to really work with this thing. Let me cut the camera back on, at least get this thing in there. It's taking me a minute. Alright guys, finally got this thing in there. I'm gonna go ahead and take this wrist pin, shoot a little bit of oil on it. I didn't really pay attention to which one I put in, but the ring I actually put in there, the top of this piston's got an N stamped on it, and that's on the intake side. And to put this thing in, this is the front of the motor, this is the rear of the motor, this is where the intake side is, so the N needs to point toward the rear of the motor. Just slide this thing in there like that, slide your wrist pin through, hold on to your actual rod to get everything lined up. There's a pretty close tolerance on these things, so it takes a little bit of wiggling to get it in there. Uh-oh, somebody's calling. Let me get that. Alright, sorry about that. Had my boss lady on the other line. So let me tap this thing in there. Still haven't got it go all the way through yet. I done got it pushed out so far that the wrist pin wouldn't slide through. There you go. Or not the wrist pin, the rod. So you make sure you push that thing all the way in there. You got to get it pretty deep so you can get this other snap ring in. And the other thing you need to do, once you get ready to put this other snap ring in, is shove your rag down in here, so that when, not if, but when this snap ring comes off, that it won't fall down into the crankcase. Hopefully this is going to go a little bit easier than putting it in on the other side went, but that's just wishful thinking. So let me see if I can get this thing pried up in here. Yep, went a lot better. I do like to take and grab the end of that ring with the screwdriver and spin it around a little bit. That kind of ensures you that it's in the groove and that it's lined up. So that's it on that. Next thing we want to do, put the gasket in. Slides over just like this. Don't put any RTV or anything on this gasket. I've had trouble with these in the past. If you do lube that up or put RTV on it, when you tighten this thing down with the pressure that's on these head bolts, it'll actually squish that gasket out and break the gasket, make it leak oil. It makes a mess. So just don't do that. Never had a problem with one sealing off, and I've put some stuff on a few of them before and had to take them right back apart, so y'all can learn from my mistakes. Alright, now we got a set of rings to go on this thing. We've got an upper and a lower ring, this oil ring, and these two little scraper rings on the top and the bottom. We're going to put the oil ring and the two scraper rings on first. They go on the very bottom groove, and what I'm going to do is we're going to do it like this. The gap for the, let's scoot the camera over here a little closer so you can see what's going on. The gap for that oil ring is here. So the biggest thing here is just to stagger your gaps. There's various different ways to do this. This is the way I've always done it, and never really had any issues. So the next little scraper ring, I put the gap for it right here. And the other scraper ring, these goes over top and on bottom of that oil ring that we just put on. The gap for the other scraper ring goes right here. So we got one gap here, and then the actual oil ring is here. So the next one you need to put on, we've got two other rings left, and these vary with what they look like and all this stuff. But both of these have a STD stamped on them for standard. The one that doesn't have the shiny ring around it, this is going to be your top ring, the shiny ring. The other one will be your middle ring. So we're going to stick this one in there in the middle. I'm going to put the gap for it right here, and then the gap for your top ring, and the STD that's stamped on there will make sure it faces the top. The gap for your top ring is going to be right here. So that's how they go in there. And then now we're just going to slide the cylinder over it and see if we can get these rings pressed in and the cylinder all the way down. So let me grab the cylinder, and I'll cut the camera back on. Alright guys, I got the new cylinder here. I did have to take these studs out, the two studs up and down. Just took two nuts and run one nut down on there and run another nut on it. Left a wrench on here and backed them out. I did clean this thing up with some transmission fluid just to get any of the machining residue out numerous times with a rag until the rag comes out clean, and that should get your residue out of your cylinder, to keep from getting any premature wear on the cylinder or rings once you get it put back together. Alright, so now this, like here, we're just going to ease this down onto the piston. This cylinder actually has a little bit of a taper on the end of it, which will help you get the rings to slide up in there. And let me see, I'm going to drop this camera down so you can see a little bit better. It's exactly what's going on the bottom end here. Alright, kind of give you a in-person view of what this is going to look like. So what I try to do is just get one side of the ring started, so the rings actually or the piston's actually going in there to just a tad bit of an angle, and that'll be enough most of the time to let it go down till the ring snaps all the way into the groove. Uh-oh, then the crankshaft started going down. Don't want that to happen. Let me see if I can get it to come back up. There we go. Alright, so we're back up so you can see a little bit. So I got the top one in there. The bottom one's sticking out here some, so I'm going to push it back in. Get it down at a little bit of an angle. push in on it with this small screwdriver. Like that. It's going in at a little angle. Alright. Okay, so I got the middle one in there. As you can see, the bottom one, the rings are already gone on it, or they're already up in there. But on this other side, they aren't. So it's going in at a little bit of an angle. You can take your hand and rock that piston back to get it go up in there a little square. Tap that thing down, tap it, tap it. That taper on the bottom of that cylinder really helps to line these things up. Some of these I does not have that taper, and some of them can get fairly difficult. There you go. Slides right down. Make sure you don't catch your gasket as it goes down. On there just like that. So now we'll stick these two 10mm bolts in there. I got to do a little work on the cylinder head. I'm gonna put some valve seals in it, and I also did put some oil on that cylinder too, so it wouldn't start up dry. I didn't say that a while ago, but let me get these 10mm bolts in. I'll cut the camera back on right before we do the valve seals in the head. Guys, one other thing I forgot to do, and this ain't the first time I've ever done this, I forgot to put these lifter caps in here. They need to go in before that cylinder goes on, so clean those up, just stick them in there, push them down till they hit the cam, and now you can put your cylinder on there. Alright guys, now we're going to work on the valve seals on this head here. I cleaned this up a little bit with some Scotch-Brite pad and wire brush in that combustion chamber. Now we're going to pop the valves out of here. There's a few different ways to do it. I've got a valve spring compressor. It's actually for automotive application, but it works great for these. You can rent these things. I purchased this one from, I believe, Jegs, but I use it a bunch. It's a little bit expensive, but if you were just going to do one set, but since I do a number of these, it actually works out. But like I say, I think you can rent these from like Advance or AutoZone or something like that. Alright, so what you do is just put this thing in there. I've already got it set for these valves anyway. You want to press the valve down until the little keepers get loose in there. Let me see if I can give you a close-up. The little keepers that are in there, as you press it down, you can see that keeper that kind of fell away. Once that happens, you can grab the keepers out of there, sometimes with your hand, sometimes you have to use a magnet, but they'll come right out, and that's all that holds the valve in there. You want to make sure you get a good grip on these things too, because if they fall on the ground or on the shop floor, it might be next week sometime before you find them. I probably should have grabbed a magnet before I started this little episode, but I didn't. So there you go. Got the keeper off, or I got both of them off. They're kind of a wedge shaped little piece of metal that holds the valve in there. And once you have those off, you loosen your pressure on your spring, and then your springs will come off. It's actually got two springs on it in this case. Little cap still on there. The valve seal on this one's doesn't look too bad. We're still going to replace it. Also, I'm going to lap these valves. This valve here's kind of stuck in there a little bit. This bike hadn't been running a long time. So what we're going to do to lap these things, this is also something that I picked up from the parts store. We got some valve grinding compound. This is a Permatex brand. I'm actually about needing some here. So we're going to use this last little smidgen of it. This stuff is about like a gel toothpaste, and it's got some gritty stuff in it. Almost feels like Gojo. And you put some of it around the seat there of your, or the sealing surface of your valve. And some people take a drill and hook to the small end of it. I've got this little wooden thing here with a suction cup on it, and it'll suction to the end of this valve, and then you just work it like you're trying to start a fire. kind of pull out on it, and that gets some of your valve grinding compound back in your little crack there. So I just do that a few times if I can get it to stay on there. And pull it out, wipe it off. Also, I'm going to clean this valve up a little bit, but you can kind of see the seating surface. It's shiny now, and really all that does is cleans up any little imperfections you may have in your valve seat to make sure you get some good compression once you get this thing started back up. To put the valve seal back in there, start off with, you just want to pull your old one off. You can use a pair of needle nose or a screwdriver to pry it up like that, and then your new one, there's your part number for a 450 Foreman. Most of these Honda valves are pretty much the same. It's the same process for the 500, the 250. There's your little valve seal. You just want to press it down on there. You can just do it with your hand. Make sure it goes on there pretty square, and then that's pretty much done. Let me get the wire brush hold of this valve, and I'll cut the camera back on once I get it cleaned up and show you how to put it all back together. Alright guys, got it cleaned up pretty well. One thing you do want to look on here once you get this thing hit with the valve grinding compound is to make sure your gap, or your the part that's shiny on here now, is pretty much consistent all the way around. I've had them before where it'll miss a spot, and a lot of times the valve will be bent in that area. So that's one thing you want to look at, because I don't really know why this motor quit running. So I don't know what its history was or any of that. So something like that could make it stop or make it run poorly. So you want to check everything when you get ready to put it back together. Alright, so now we just stick the compressor back on here, lower it back down until it puts some pressure on your spring, and slide your keepers back in with the smaller side. The little wedge part, the skinny part of it, goes in first, and fit in there just like that. Ease up on your pressure. There you go, a completed valve seal. I don't have a hammer right here in front of me, but well, here's one. Use Riker's hammer. I like to tap these things just to make sure I get it, those little keepers are seated in there good, and they are. So let me jump over here and do this other one. I'm not going to do it on camera because it's pretty much the same as the exhaust valve. But I'm going to do that, and I'll get ready, got the camera back on right before we put the head back on the cylinder. Alright guys, got this thing cleaned up. Got the head gasket on here, two dowels. You got a dowel that goes in here and a dowel goes in here. Got both of those stuck in there. And just lower this thing down on your head, on your cylinder. Should rock right down there on there pretty good. Get it to slide down over top of your dowels. There's two bolts that need to go in here. I'm not sure which size they are because I've got some bolts. These were already taken out when I got the bike, so I'm gonna have to guess what size they are, and those are too long. I might have to find some bolts. Anyway, the next thing you need to put on or put in is your push rods. Grab both of those out of the crate, and they just slide in from the top. I usually mark these things. I don't really know if it makes a difference or not, but they slide right in here into the holes that are in your head gasket, just like that. And then your rocker arms go on. They also have two dowels right there at the top of the head on it. Rocker arms go on like this here, and that lines up over top of your push rods. Knock it down with your hand there. So your push rods are pretty loose, but we still got to tighten the head down. Alright, next thing we need to do is put the head acorn nuts on. There's washers that go on these as well. There's a smaller washer and a larger washer. The smaller washers go on the rocker arm holders there, and the larger washers go outside the rocker arm cover out here around the spark plug. So put all of those on There's six nuts, I'm sorry, total. Acorn nuts. You can about tell where they came from because the shiny ones naturally go under the rocker arm. The dirty ones go on the outside. So just run those down. Those are 14mm heads. Let me see what the torque spec is on these things. They have to be torqued to 39 Newton meters or 29 foot-pounds. I usually do it in a couple steps. Say 29 foot-pounds, I might go 15, I might go 20, and then I might go to 29 just to kind of space it out. But tighten them down in a crisscross pattern and just torque those. They definitely need to be torqued. Once you get those torqued down, then you can tighten up your two 10mm bolts here, as well as the two 10mm bolts on the bottom of your cylinder, because as this head mashes everything together, these can get loose. So get all that torqued down, and then I'll cut the camera back on right before we adjust the valves on it. Alright guys, now we're going to do the valves on this thing. You got to line your T-mark up in this hole here. I'll see if I can cut to a little excerpt of what that T-mark looks like. I don't know if this is going to work or not, but somewhere or another I'll try to stick that or either play that right now. Alright guys, the tick marks on this flywheel, I have a heck of a time showing these when I get them trying to line up for top dead center. And as you can see, these are very small tick marks, so I kind of highlighted them with a red marker. As this thing rotates around, as you're rotating it with the crank bolt, these are the two marks that you see first. When you see those, I usually start slowing down, and then you'll look for the next mark, which is the F mark. It's got a little line. I know it's a little bit blurry on my phone here. I mean on my camera, but there's a little tick mark. That's what you're lining up with, and then an F right above it. The next one is the little tick mark in the T. That's the mark you're looking for. That T mark is top dead center. You would line that up with the little mark in the case. I don't have the plug out of the back side of this case right here, but you can see there's an indentation right there. And that's what you line it up with. Pretty much just put that tick mark in the center of this timing hole here is how you get it at top dead center. I've tried to show this on numerous videos and never could, just because it's so small and so hard to see once you, especially if you're trying to look through this hole. But that's what you're looking for, the little line below the T. Alright, that's what the T mark looks like. That means you're at top dead center. Usually at this point you'll have play in both your valves up and down. That one's just a little bit tight, but it's kind of hard to tell on this when you have turned it over a few times. But I have not let this turn over since we set it at top dead center before. So, but I guess I'll just show you how to do it, just in case you don't have yours at top dead center, or it may have gotten turned or something like that. The easiest way to do it is to turn your crankshaft bolt here, which is a 17mm. I've got to find my 17mm socket. Well, this one's going to have to work. So you turn this thing clockwise, and what you're looking for is the intake valve, which is the one here by the carburetor. This one here to go up and go down. And once it does that, that means you're at the top dead center of the compression stroke. So there we go. The valve, I don't know if y'all could see that or not, but the valve's gone down and then came back up. And that's when you start looking for your T mark over here. So let me find that real quick. Like I say, it's hard to video this, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it that I got it in the mark. There'll be two tick marks, then an F mark, and then a T mark. Just kind of line it up. There's a little notch in the case here. That's what you want to line it up with. Just really just get that line in the middle of the hole, and that means you're at top dead center. And yeah, that valve's still a little tight. But since we've put another cylinder on this thing and a new gasket and all that stuff, you're going to wind up with having your clearances a little bit different. On this 450 Foreman, The valve clearance is the pretty common 0.15 millimeters or 6/1000 of an inch clearance. A lot of the Hondas have that same valve clearance, especially some of the older ones. They kind of changed it up on some of the newer ones, but 6/1000 is what we're looking for. My feeler gauge is not the best in the world. Actually, I about wore out all my 6/1000 feeler gauges. So I got one here. Alright, so what you want to do, grab your feeler gauge and you need to stick it. Let me see if I can get this camera sitting down just a little bit so you can see what I'm doing here. Hang on just a sec. Alright guys, here we go. We're going to go with 6/1000 on these things. Both of the valves in this case are the same as far as clearance goes. And what I like to do is take a 10 millimeter wrench and break these lock nuts loose. Just like that. And then take your feeler gauge and stick it above the valve stem there, and that little adjuster bolt, this one won't go in there, and that's the one that we were dealing with that was a little tight earlier. So I like to have a little bit of drag on this, but not to where you can't stick the feeler gauge in and out. And take your screwdriver and hold that adjustment right there as you tighten that lock nut down, and that will help it stay in the same location. I still like to check it because sometimes they get loose. And see, that's just a little bit too loose, so we need to tighten it up just a hair bit more. I'm not sure what the exact measurement of a hair bit is, but it's a little less than a little bit. So about there. There we go. We got some pretty good resistance on that one. This other one here, pretty tight too. So if anything, these things usually loosen up after you crank the thing up. So it's good to have them a little on the tight side, at least for this first adjustment, so you don't have to pull this thing apart and readjust them after you put oil in it and put it on the bike and get it to crank. So that one's a little bit too tight, so back it off just a hair. And you don't have to turn that adjuster very much to make a big difference in that valve clearance. That's it. So the valves are set like they should be. I'm going to put the valve cover back on now. This one here has actually been painted, so yours is going to be silver, where this one's black. But it's got a metal gasket in it, which is actually a reusable gasket. I normally don't put any RTV on these, but if any gasket on this thing is going to leak, it's more than likely going to be this one here. So I do put a thin coat of RTV around it just to make sure that thing seals up good and you don't have any leaks and running all down your motor, and makes a whole mess on the motor, especially when you just rebuilt it and got it running good. Nobody wants a leaky motor. So I'm gonna stick this gasket on there, put a little RTV around it, and throw some bolts in it, torque them down to the 10 Newton meters that most of these 10 millimeter headed bolts are torqued to. And that's going to be about it. The only other thing I've got left to do is to bolt the pull start on and put the thing back in the bike. So I'm going to stick the pull start back on here and a new spark plug, because I do have one of those for it. And the next video I show, hopefully, I'm not going to show how to put this thing on, because I think if you've gotten this far with it, you probably know how to put the thing back on. So I'm not going to put an install video because they can be kind of tedious. But the next video, hopefully you see, will be the first start up of this thing, and y'all can hear it run. So see y'all in a little bit. Alright guys, finally got this motor back on this thing. Don't quite have it all the way back together because I got a few other things to do. Fix the snorkel, and ignition switch was bad on it, and I got one of those on order, so I got something kind of rigged up to make it work. But we're gonna see if this thing will crank up. This carburetor looks fairly new, but that don't really mean anything. Hopefully it'll let it crank up, so let's see what it'll do. I have to give it a little gas. Well, it helps if you turn the gas on, which I got it on now. We'll see what it does. Not real sure which way reserve is, so I don't have much gas in it. Well, looks like that's reserve. There you go. Another successful motor job. Alright guys, well, check out my other videos, hit the like button, subscribe. Y'all have a good night.